lot of the questions I have in here come from things I've learned from both sides. Stuff that will help me as a consultant be a better pen tester for you, but also help me as a client weed out good and bad pen testing firms. So as we go through this, I want this to be a discussion. If at any point you have any questions, raise your hand, interrupt me, all good. And if you have any questions that you ask your pen testers, we'd love to hear those towards the end too. I also taught a class here yesterday. I do some pen testing classes over at conferences like B-Sides, Rochester, for example. Yeah, let's kick it off. So the first question I would ask, and this is a question that really should spark a discussion if it hasn't already. If you are asking this question after the pen test report is written, it's probably a little too late. And the question is, what do you know about us? What do you know about our needs? What do you know about why we want a pen test done? Right? Is it just for compliance reasons, just a checkbox? Or is it that we want to better understand how well we'll detect you? Is it so we will better understand what security controls we have and how well they're working? I was talking to a client today and they were talking about the EDR they have. They have endpoint detection from Sentinel-1. They have Splunk being used as SIEM. They have network access control from Cisco ICE. And that's great. I asked them, when was the last time you tested it? Well, we get the alerts every day. Okay? But how many false positives? Every now and then we'll have some false positives. When was the last time you had a breach? Oh, we've never had a breach. Great. Let's have a conversation. Let's see if we can, generate some alerts in there and really test this out. But understanding those needs is going to be what will really set the stage for a good or a bad pen test. Okay? Like, for example, we have one understanding of something. We feel that we made this assumption. If we think of children, for example, we take the device away and they're going to just go outside and play. And this is what it really ends up being. Okay? I don't have any children, so I'm just assuming this is what happens based on TV, right? There we go. And I'm not a fan of the menu of pen testing. Like, here's a menu, pick what you want. Well, if I came in and I started doing an internal network pen test, and the class I taught yesterday was all about Windows. But what if you don't have Windows? What if your environment is all Macs and everybody works from home and nobody's joined to Active Directory? How will that methodology work? What if you were wanting a pen test for PCI compliance? And all I did was look at the external infrastructure, never really looked at any segmentation. What if you were wanting a pen test for healthcare, for HIPAA, high trust, and I never looked at the patient data? That's the kind of conversation, that's the kind of discussion that needs to happen before the pen test is started. In fact, before it's even sold, you should be having this conversation. You should be trying to understand, and this is to the consultants, understand your client's needs, right? And to the clients, make sure your consultant understands that needs. If they're not even asking that question, why do you want a pen test? What kind of company are you? What industry are you in? What are you worried about? What would keep you up at night? If they're not asking those questions, this is just gonna be, you come in, you do 5 or 6 or 20, 30 exploits that you all know about from Metasploit and you walk away. You may get some findings. But I don't see that actually improving the security program. The pen tester should be a partner. There should be an advisor. There shouldn't be just some hacker you hire and comes in and does 5 or 6 things and walks away. Like, one of the things I try to really sort of bake into my onboarding at work is with consultants first, or advisors first, hackers later. I'd rather hire somebody who can talk to people. I'd rather hire somebody who has empathy, who has compassion, somebody who's maybe done some sysadmin work, who's maybe done some IT work, been a developer, and then teach them to be a hacker, than hire a hacker and teach them to be a human. I heard some chuckles in here, so I'm sure people have experience with that. And flexibility is a big thing. Halfway through, quite often through a pen test, we'll find that what the client had told us maybe isn't fully accurate anymore. For example, we were pen testing a client, really large environment. We got domain admin within about 10 minutes. We got access to patient data in about 2 hours. We had access to their CEO's emails. We basically had access to everything. We had scoped the pen test for 2 weeks. So what do you do at that point? Do you just waste that time? Or do you have flexibility to turn the remainder of the time into something more useful? There's no point just sitting there and keep on pen testing. If you already have 20, 30, 40 findings, I'm not a fan of giving clients a report that has 40, 50 findings. The moment it goes more than 5, to be honest, I start getting a little concerned about the quality of the report. When it gets to 20, I'm a little too worried at that point. Because if I'm giving you hundreds of findings to fix, nothing is going to get fixed. If I'm not prioritizing what you're getting, if I'm not telling you these are the ones you got to go after first, nothing is getting fixed. And if I come back the next year and we have the same issues, I don't really think it's your fault. It's my fault. Maybe I didn't explain it right. Maybe the report I gave you wasn't very helpful. So in that, flexibility comes into play, because if, in this specific client's project, we had 2 weeks scoped for the level of effort, and we got every objective on day 1. We turned the remainder of the time into advisory hours. Let's just have some more conversations. Let's look at your environment in a more holistic approach. Let's look at some other areas we haven't looked at. Let's look at some user awareness training, some training to your sysadmins. That's the level of flexibility a partner will have. And I hate to be doing kind of a sales pitch in here, because that's not what this conference is about, and any conference should be about. It's more comes from being on the receiving end of pen tests, where I could tell the pen tester did nothing halfway through. Or I could tell that we had bought something from a services firm, and they just knew one way to do things. And the moment they realized our environment was different than what they had expected, everything just kind of fell flat. So that level of flexibility comes from being a consultant, not a hacker. Okay. Budget transparency. How many of you have received SOWs, statement of works, quotes, and you couldn't tell what the level of effort is? How much time are they going to spend on this work? When I was at Cigna, we got a pen test quote for exact same pen test, exact same environment. One was $50,000, the other was $100,000. Both about the same type of companies. I knew that they pay their people about the same too, because I had friends in those companies. But $50,000 difference in the cost, that's a lot of difference. And how do I know if it's because your hourly rate is higher, it's because you're going to put consultants versus seniors on the project, or you're just, over-scoping it, or somebody's under-scoping it? So something I started pushing my consultants to do at that point when I was receiving the quotes, because I was doing it on my end. I was trying to do some math on my end, trying to figure out how much time they're going to spend. Instead of me reverse engineering the quote, I started asking them to give me their hourly rate. What is your hourly rate? How much time are you spending on this? How many hours of effort do you have scoped for this project? They should be able to tell you that. If they can't tell you that, that's some secret sauce. Why is that a secret sauce? And I'll tell you why that's a secret sauce. We have consulting firms where the pen testers are doing double the amount of work. In the same week where you have 40 hours scheduled for one pen test, you have 40 for another pen test, and they're working on 2 different pen tests. As somebody who teaches pen testing in after hours, I can tell you the best ideas you have in pen testing, the best job you do in pen testing is when you take a break. When you step back, you're eating something, you're going for a walk, you're watching something, and right away something comes to mind. Oh, I should have tried that. Whenever I have students taking OSCP, for example, and they'll tell me they got stuck on a box that they were trying to get into, I tell them to take a break. A pen tester cannot take a break if they are working 2, 3, 4 projects at the same time, and each one of them is 40 hours scheduled. Okay? So budget transparency needs to happen more in the industry. And if you are not asking your pen testing firm, how much are you really going to spend? How much time are you going to spend on a project? You should start asking that. They should be able to answer you that. That's the level of partnership that you need. I've got to have some memes in there. Tech debt exists everywhere. I had a client a while back when I was doing HIPAA and high trust assessments. They had MS-DOS. This is 2016, I think. It wasn't too long ago. MS-DOS robot. That actually is a pretty good test of how good of a pen testing consultant you are. Yes, it makes me cringe that they had MS-DOS robot, MS-DOS device in their environment, but you gotta start asking questions. Can you replace it? When you start asking those questions, you'll find out the cost of replacement for that device is $10 million. This is a nonprofit hospital. They can't afford that. So your pen test report, yeah, they may call it a critical issue, but you also need to take into account when you make recommendation, they can't replace it. So the recommendation of replace that robot, replace that device, and that's it, probably not a good recommendation. Maybe start thinking about firewalling it. Right? Start thinking about segmenting it. How do you train your employees? And this, anytime you go and interview somewhere, ask them that question. What training are you going to provide me? Are you going to send me to conferences? Am I going to have to put in a justification letter just for a conference that costs $50? This happens a lot. We tell our pen testers to go and get OSCP, and we made that sort of a standard. And I used to teach OSCP, and I still sometimes mentor people on that. If you don't know what OSCP is, it's Offensive Security Certified Professional. It's from Offensive Security. It's a good certification. In my experience, the good training comes from people you work with. Somebody asked me yesterday about one of the jobs I left, why I left that job, and my response was, I was the smartest person in the room. And that's a terrible place to be honest. Especially in pen testing, you've got to have people around you who can teach you. In technology, in any field in technology, even if you are still managing IBM AX systems, you've got to have people around you who can teach you something. Because the field is moving so quickly, there was a time when just knowing how to password spray was enough to get into Windows systems. Not anymore. I have a client who has a 24-character password requirement. Although the only password I was able to crack was A, B, C, D, E, F, G. So ask your pen testing consulting firm, how are they training their employees? Are they going to any conferences? Are they taking any internal and external training? And if their response is they learn on the job, that means they're going to be learning while they're pen testing your environment. They're going to be testing out exploits on your environment to see if they work. Not a good way to learn. Are you empowering your consultants? Are you collaborating among your team members? Consulting firms, please stop requiring your pen testers to have findings. That creates a really terrible environment. Quite often I'll talk to people who are mentoring and they'll tell me, yeah, I have to have at least 10 findings in my pen test reports. And that's when you end up with pen test report which says you've got SSL 3 and that's a critical issue, or you've got all these SSL TLS issues in your whole report. We got a pen test report like that a while back where we got 850 vulnerabilities, 100 of them were critical, but they gained no access. And one of the critical issues was you use SSH. So how are you empowering your consultants? How are you helping them and empowering them to collaborate? Are you promoting that collaboration? Or are you creating an environment of your own consultants, your own team members competing against each other? That's not the best place to be. And this kind of goes to anybody who's also looking for a pen testing role. Try to find that out. You don't want to end up in an environment like that. You want to end up in an environment where this collaboration is encouraged, where they are teaching each other, right? They're jumping on CTF calls together. We have our blue team and red team every week jump on a call and do things together. creates a really good, fun environment, especially when they catch us and they mock us, and then we move around and we mock them. It's a fun time. How will you keep us in loop? We paid $50,000 for a pen test. It's been 2 weeks. Our consultants said they were going to be working this week, but we have no idea. I hear that quite often from some clients. And this comes from a lot of times we do not have project managers. Anybody here a project manager? Any adjacent? No? Well, if you find a project manager, give them a hug. With consent, of course. Ask them first before you give them a hug. Because us pen testers, you can't trust us to communicate well. We hate picking up a phone. When we talk in conundrums. And we cannot keep our time straight. And that's where we need an adult in the room, and that being project manager. So you got to ask your consulting firm, how are you going to keep us in the loop? How are we going to know that you are testing? One of the things I require my people to do is start and stop notification. Every time when you're starting, it's like, you used to clock in when you got to the office. Anytime you're starting a pen test, let the client know. Also, let them know what your start IP address is, where you are starting from. Because if I'm getting a lot of alerts, if my EDR is doing its job, my SIM is doing its job, I'm getting alerts, I want to know if it's my pen tester who I pay to do the pen test, or if it's somebody out of Russia, China, Iran, knocking down my network. There's nothing wrong with using the pen test to test your incident response. How well did we detect what was happening in the environment? So start-stop notifications, I'm starting at this time today. This is the type of stuff I want to do. Especially if you're going to be running a Nessus scan, let the client know that you're running a Nessus scan. And Nessus can take networks down. Story time. Starting out pen testing many years ago, I ran a Nessus scan against a client's environment, ended up taking it down. They had a really old switch. Its memory filled up because Nessus keeps a lot of connections open. So memory filled up, the switch just goes kaput, and I get a phone call from them, stop the Nessus scan, start looking into it. First of all, that's a finding. A single device took down your network. That is a finding. Just last year, I met the CISO from that company at Ijaz Atlanta, and she's like, do you remember me, Q? I was like, oh yeah, I remember you. I'm sorry I took down your network. She goes, yeah, I got fired for that. Oh my God. And she goes, no, I'm joking. I'm kidding. We ended up replacing the firewall and the switch afterwards. You helped me out. I was like, oh, a sigh of relief. But bad things will happen. And this is where communication is important. You gotta build that relationship where you can be honest with the consultant. The consultant can be honest with you. I generally like to ask my clients, having learned from that experience, I like to ask them, hey, do you have any old devices in the environment? How old are they? Any switches that are 10, 20 years old? Do you still have any hubs in the environment? Have you done any Nessus scanning or Nexpose before, and has it caused any issues? I like to ask them, do you have any HP printers? Anybody know HP Jet Direct protocol? If you telnet to an HP printer on port 9100, type whatever you want, press enter, it's going to print a page. If you are Nessus, if you are Nmap, if you are Nexpose, you think that's a web server. So you're trying to fuzz, you're trying to just keep on adding weird words, weird characters, trying to get it to do something. You think it's a web server trying to find a web app vulnerability. Somebody in that office is worried that that printer has gone mad, especially around Halloween time, right? Anonymous used that vulnerability a while back against a law firm where they printed all black pages and caused them to run out of black ink. Okay? So ask those questions. Have that conversation before the pen test starts. Get to know the environment. I even go as far as asking the client, hey, what's your password policy? And what's your lockout policy? I will be performing password sprays against your environment. I don't want to lock anything out. Generally, I'll be very safe and only do one attempt every 30 minutes. But sometimes I've seen clients go really, really granular with that and really strict, and they'll lock out every admin account with any bad password attempt. So I don't want that happening. So I like to ask that because an attacker will figure that out eventually. Sometimes you'll just do a Google search for password policy for whatever company you're testing. Sometimes you'll find a PDF of that. And there's nothing wrong with somebody knowing your password policy. It's better for me to know that so I can better tailor my work for you. Findings notifications. A lot of the pen testing firms, it takes us a while to get you the final report. It's going through QA. It is going to take a while to make sure PenTester did their job, grammatical checks, that kind of stuff. But I don't like waiting 2 weeks to let you know that you have a critical issue. This is where my recommendation is have the conversation beforehand. When do you want to be notified of critical issues? Some clients don't care. They're like, don't talk to me. Just give me the report at the end. Right? But some, I like to do daily notifications of critical findings. If I found that your domain admin's password is password, I would like to notify you that right away. Okay? If you find any sort of a data breach in the environment, I just stop testing at that point. I don't want to muddy your SIM logs, your indicators with my own stuff. Scheduling changes, bad stuff happens. We have a client right now whose project had to be scheduled because one of my testers left. That caused a schedule change. Gotta be open with the client. Let them know the schedule change. What's your needs around this? Their response was, end of the year is fine, so we figured it out. But that's where communication is key. Gotta have that communication. Gotta talk. Gotta conversate. And my preference, don't just stick with email. Every now and then pick up the phone, talk, Oh, my favorite. What will the final deliverable look like? What does your report look like? Am I going to get something that's written in gibberish? Who knows there is a fourth output format to Nmap? Anybody know? So Nmap, which you can use to scan the environment for open ports, what services are running, what hosts are live, it has a script kiddie format too, the lead format. So where E is 3, S is 5, I is 1, you could have a report written like that. I had a colleague back in the day who was on a call with a client, and the network engineer kept saying, that's not possible, that's not possible. You had your Cisco devices with default password Cisco, default username Cisco. Oh, that's not possible, not possible. So he's like, okay, I will revise the report for you with some more evidence. So he revised the report, added some more evidence, but in the executive summary, he rewrote it so that if you took the very first character of every sentence, it read, that's not possible. So we're a creative bunch every now and then. So is your PenTest report going to have a lot of, TLS 1.0 findings, a lot of SSL TLS findings? Nothing wrong with those. There are some very effective ones. I was telling the class yesterday a story about this PenTest did a long time ago, a pretty large organization in the IT technology field, and we found a Heartbleed vulnerability. Heartbleed came out, I think it was 2013, 14, something like that. It is a vulnerability in SSL protocol when your site's running HTTPS, where it's trying to keep the connection alive so it has a heartbeat that it sends. In that heartbeat, you can have the web server leak its contents in the memory, contents of what's running on that box at that time. So we found that vulnerability. I think it's SSL 3 that's vulnerable to it. And we had it give us the memory contents. Because heartbeat field is tiny, you have to do it a few times to get different contents. Eventually, we got what looked like a URL, a username, and a password. So we log into that, and we see this big box that says close. Like, okay, press on that. Now it says open. Press that. Now it says close. Press that. Now it says open. Press that. We get a phone call from the client. Stop messing with our garage door. So that kind of vulnerability is important, right? It plays a role. And this is where, yes, if you've got something like this, it could have a role to play in a breach. Show me that in the PenTest report. I don't care that you found 41 passwords. We have MFA. Did you bypass it? Were you able to log in to a box? Were you able to do something with it? There is a concept in journalism, open the freezer. During Hurricane Katrina, somebody reported, one of the news outlets reported, that there were bodies found in a freezer. Some people had jumped into the freezer trying to save themselves from the hurricane waters, thought they would be able to come out after the water went away. It took too long, they passed away in the freezer. Later, they found out that story was made up. The journalist had heard that from National Guardsmen who either had just made up or they heard it from somebody else who had made up. So that's where the concept of open the freezer came from. And I like to apply that to PenTest reports. So what? You got somebody's password. So what? You got my CEO's credentials. Were you able to get in? Were you able to log in? Did our controls stop you or at least slow you down? Okay? For example, I was able to establish command and control channel with one of your servers. Great. Tell me how much effort that was. Okay? Did my EDR at least slow you down? That's the type of detail that deliverable should provide. If we are coming in every year, we're getting domain admin, and we are going all over the environment, doing the bad things, doing whatever we need to do, the CFO is going to be like, why am I spending money on security? Why am I spending money on the EDR? Why am I spending money on SIM? Why am I spending money sending you to Rochester Security 7 if every year the PenTester is coming in and they're just rolling all over the environment? But reality is, the first year we came in, took us 10 minutes to get domain admin. Second year, 1 week. Third year, 2 weeks. That type of detail needs to be in the report. That type of detail helps show security program is improving. Us pen testers, we're constantly training, we're constantly improving. We, for example, pay for private attack tools. Any open source tools that we use, we like to sponsor them. And that has helped us get a lot of really cool tools that very few people have access to. And less the number of people that have access to a pen test, an attack tool, the higher the chance EDR is not going to detect it. It hasn't seen it, right? So we are constantly improving. So are you. Why not show that in the report? Why just say, oh, everything is bad every year? Okay. So open the freezer and then show what you were able to do and talk about any sort of difficulties you, the pen tester, had to go through to get to that point. Reproducible steps. How many of you go back to the pen tester and say, hey, we think we fixed the issue. Can you test? And then they charge you $200, $300, $400 per hour to retest, only to find out that the issue is not fixed. And you do it 2 times, 3 times, 4 times, eventually it's fixed. Well, what if we had reproducible steps in the pen test report that you could follow? That you could follow to test it yourself, and then you come to me and say, hey, Qasim, I think I fixed it. Here's our evidence. Can you double check and update the report? We like to, and I'm not really a big fan of writing too detailed reports. There's hundreds of pages. Nobody's going to read that. But at least enough detail that you can reproduce the steps. What command did you run? Why did you run it? Why did you do it? What was the outcome of that? Okay. And as I mentioned, why is important? Why did you choose to not drop malware on my disk and instead went for my OneDrive environment? Why did you choose to go after this web server instead of my Exchange server? Why did you choose to take this path? Because that's going to help you, the client and the blue team and the sysadmins understand how the attacker might react, how might they go around in our environment. Us attackers, we go for low-hanging fruit. But what I consider low-hanging fruit, maybe you don't. So having that sort of thought process in the report is important. And you're going to find that a lot of consulting firms will have it in what they'll call attack narrative section. That is where they're selling their methodology. This is the stuff we did, and this is why we did it. Anybody want to change my mind in here? No? My favorite response to this was, we don't even have DA in the environment because we have no Active Directory. Right? And there's times when you've got a small company, maybe 3 or 4 people, do they really need Active Directory at that point? Okay. So this is where our QA process comes into play for the reporting. Did you go to that next step? Did you do something else with it? Whenever I pen test hospitals, one of the things I like to do is try to get into the electronic medical record database and do a select count on all the patient records. This is how many patient records I had access to. Okay? I pen tested a bank a while back, and I printed myself a credit card. Okay? I gained access to a client's environment a while back where they had some really niche, innovative stuff. And I took screenshots, of course, redacted the heck out of it, because you don't know where the report's going to go. So you don't want to put too sensitive things in there. But show the impact. Go to the next step and show what you were able to do with what you gained. And don't just stop at domain admin. How many of you have more than one domain in your environment? Right? Go for the other domain, or if it's in scope, go for the forest. If it's not already in scope, pick up the phone, call the client. Hey, I've got this access. I want to see what's on the other side. I think it may be important. I have time. That's where flexibility comes into play. I have time. Let's take a look at that. Okay. Was pen testing a hospital in New Hampshire a while back, and we gained access to the domain really quickly. The domain admin's username was ADM, and the password was ADM, like admin. So this was within minutes. We have domain admin. Made no sense, but we could have stopped there. We got DA. Let's write the report. Now we have 4 days to write the report instead of 1 day. But we call up the CISO. He goes, that doesn't look like us. Are you sure you're in our network? Yeah, we are. Okay, let me call the IT folks. IT director comes in the call. No, that's not us. Who is it? We have no idea. Let me call Joe. He left 10 years ago. Maybe he knows. Joe knew who it was. It was an electronic medical record vendor who had set up their own domain in the client's environment, and they told Joe about it. Joe forgot to document, and Joe retired 10 years ago. Right? So this is where, go across the environment, see what else is there. Any of you who are going to be going for OSCP at any point, or you already are, don't stop at when you get the root on that box, when you get local admin. See what else is on there. Those of you who are doing my class, don't stop at getting the flag. There's something else in there. Okay. So don't just stop there. Go to the next step. Open the freezer. Don't stop at DA. Oh, do you want Charles with that? Oh, I'm getting hungry now. What other services do you offer? This is where, when I used to work at my very first security job, I loved the fact that I was working with people who were doing risk assessment and risk management. Because when I was coming in with this is a critical finding, this is a high risk finding, I was able to do this, I was able to do that, they could have the conversation of mitigating controls with me. And I gotta tell you, I hated that. Mitigating controls, that doesn't matter. Well, it does. As I grew older, I realized that. And this is where having those teammates to learn from, those other departments to learn from, is helpful. There's a lot of firms that I have seen their reports, and they're really, really technical reports, really good reports. But when it comes to risk, when it comes to severity, they lack. Okay? And when it comes to recommendations, they fall behind. Vulnerability management. I'm going to come in and I'll give you the Nessus scan output, I'll give you my pen test output, and I've got 20, 30, 40 findings in there. You have no idea how to manage it, how to track it. Okay? How many of actually are proud of our vulnerability management tool? If anybody is, I want to talk to you because I'm looking for one. Okay? So this is where a lot of firms, and you should ask your consulting partner, you should ask your pen test partner, do you provide any remediation assistance? If I don't know how to prioritize this, which by the way, the pen test report, the findings in there should already be prioritized. They should already tell you what you should go after first, what is least important. If I have 10 high-risk issues in my report, nothing is high risk. If everything is high risk, nothing is high risk. Okay? So the risk severity of the pen test findings should take into account the mitigating controls, how much effort it's going to take to fix it, how much effort does it take to exploit that issue. If I have 2 issues and both of them will give me root access, but one has an existing module in Metasploit that I can just run, and the other one requires a custom code, custom exploit tool, they're not exactly the same severity. Okay? One requires more effort. So this is where it's important to have people who can show you that, who can teach you that. A lot of companies are starting to do vCISO services, advisory services, a bit of a buzzword sometimes. But it can be fun. I've been doing some vCISO and I've been liking it. I'm come from the education background, so what I've been doing is office hours with my client. And I'll just jump on a call and we'll just talk about security issues they have. But ask your consulting firm, do they offer anything else? And it's not necessarily to buy something else from you. They're gonna love telling you they have all these other services, and that's great. It's less about buying those services and more about, is your pen tester going to have people around them to learn from? Am I going to have somebody else in your company to advise me if I can't figure out what to do here? Okay? If you came in and you blew through my environment and I detected nothing, do you have somebody in your company who can jump on a call with me and tell me how I can detect things? Tell me how I can modify my Sentinel-1. Tell me how I can modify my Carbon Black config. If you've got Carbon Black in your environment, I want you to test something. There's a setting in there, forget exactly what it is. I think that's the same thing with Sentinel-1 and CrowdStrike 2. If the response is taking more than 15 seconds, so all these modern EDRs, they are using cloud to find out if something is malicious or not. They're going to run in a cloud environment, in a sandbox. And at some point, you have to stop waiting for EDR to tell you if the application is malicious. You have to make a decision. Do you let the application run because business comes first? Or do you not let the application run? Okay? One of the ways we've been bypassing a lot of EDR is we'll just have our malware sleep for 15 seconds. And after 15 seconds, it's, well, we have to make a decision. Do we let it run or not? And EDRs often just go, let it run. If it's not 15, maybe it'll do 30 seconds. So SOC, the SOC as a service, somebody with MDR experience, managed detection response, can help you figure that out. Oftentimes, this is what we responded with. We enabled MFA. That's great. We require MFA, multi-factor authentication, to remote into the boxes over a remote desktop. But are you using MFA with WinRM, with PowerShell remoting? Are you using MFA when somebody CDs into a remote directory? Are you using MFA when somebody just shares a file over OneDrive? So that's the type of conversation a pen tester should be having with you. Yeah? So question to you all. Anybody want to share any questions you ask? Or any questions for me? Yeah, go ahead.
What do you prefer when you're doing pen tests against a open system or one that has been locked down? Because, for example, some companies, their strategy is to deliver the system open and allow the customer to choose based on their IT requirements and their policies. Others say, no, we want to deliver it secure and then make them open it up. I always like to go secure it.
Yeah.
Because use all the controls, lock it down, then pen test it and see what holes there are, right?
So that was asked me in a class yesterday too, and my favorite approach is similar to you. Let all the security controls stay. Let them in play. Because that is more real world, right? Your attacker is not going to come in and disable EDR. They're not going to come in and disable things without having to run through some hoops. So leave all of those security controls in place except one thing. do not ban my IP address. Do not kick me out of the environment. Because then that 2-week pen test ended on day 1. This is a pen test. And if it was a stealth red team engagement, then it would be, yeah, feel free to ban me, because I would have different environments to come from. Then we would have scoped 6 weeks, 4 weeks, longer time period. A pen test is loud, find as many vulnerabilities as you can, show impact. So in that, I'm not worried about detection. And on top of that, what I will ask clients is send me screenshots of your EDR alerts. Send me screenshots of your SIM alerts, and I will add them to my report. Because when you deliver the report to your board, the board is going to ask you, did you not stop them? So I can show in my pen test report, I had asked you not to stop me. You left the EDR running, it blocked me. You left the SIM running, it alerted on it. You left all the other security controls in place. I asked you not to ban my IP address, and here's some evidence of you detecting me, some good things that you did. You probably would have stopped me in step 2, step 3, 2 hours into the environment. So only thing I ask is just don't ban my IP, but I do add some evidence that you detected me. Yeah.
To add to that, though, what we do is we have our pen tester test from the internet point of view. We have them test from on-premise point of view, and I sneak them in so that my security team and my MDR service don't know when and where they're there.
Oh, I love that.
Find out how fast are they detected. And then if they did get kicked off the network, I put it back on as soon as they're detected.
Yeah.
And then one more step, I give them domain credentials.
Assumed breach.
With that.
Yeah.
What can they access that they shouldn't access?
I love that. So you're doing assumed breach on top of just external assessment. So I did a pen test like that a while back. We generally ask the client what they want. A lot of it comes down to what their needs are, what their capabilities are, how much they want to spend. When I started pen testing, we had a client where they sneaked us in. And what we did was we put a laptop in the other side of the building, and that laptop was running a Nessus scan, really loud scan. And then we walked to way on the other side of the building, and that's where we did our stealthy test. Okay. So the blue team is monitoring that Nessus scan. They grab the laptop, they lock it in a cabinet, they're like, we won. We're over there just being very stealthy.
How would you get better about scoping the hours for a pen test? As far as I'm a customer, and I go to you for a pen test, how do I know I'm not going to get stuck with what you call flexibility? I call extra cost in your advisory services, right?
I like that.
Pay for a pen test. I don't want to pay for a pen test and then get stuck with 20 extra hours of advisory services.
Ask them exactly what they're going to spend those hours with first. So when your pen testing firm tells you they're going to spend 40 hours, 60 hours, what are they being spent on? I probably can't tell you that exactly which activity I'm going to be doing at that point, but I can break them down, and I've seen a lot of companies do that. This is going to be a technical testing window, this many hours on project management, this many hours on QA, and this many hours on debrief. And we get better at figuring out what the good balance of that is if more companies do that. You can really see the comparison. When you start comparing, you can do better. I think we do well, but I'm sure that somebody else does better than us.
So how are you scoping, though, if you're in a pen test, Paycheck's a Fortune 500 company versus a small...
Did I give you my business card?
So, like, how do you know how much time you just spend
Yeah.
versus a small
So I generally ask, first of all, what your goal is. How far do you want me to go? What type of access will I have? If I'm being given access to a Windows device that has EDR on it, I'm probably going to need to spend more time first getting around the EDR, okay? Instead of just being able to drop in a Linux box in the environment. Am I going internal only or external too? Am I going against applications too? Then how many assets do you have is a very common question that you get asked. If they didn't even ask you how many assets you have, I am not sure how good of a pen test that is. That's a throw in the dark, because you may have pen testers who are in a hurry and they're just rushing to get work done, and you may have pen testers who are just sitting in there twiddling their thumbs. They got the work done, now they're just wasting time.
You can choose two approaches to this. You can choose a total scope pen test, in which case you've got to work through what's our asset count,
Yeah.
what types of assets are they? Are they cloud? Are they internet facing? Or are you going to go on premise, right? That's a big discussion.
Mm-hmm.
I don't do that. What I do, because I can't afford to do that every year.
Yeah.
That would be a $250,000 pen test.
You have a massive environment, yeah.
Okay, I can't do that.
Yeah.
What I do is every year I have a discussion that says, I want a pen test that is about 3 weeks worth of effort. I'm going to give you 4 high priority targets, but I also want you to discover me.
Mm-hmm.
Be an attacker. Find out who I am and what you would go after. What low-hanging fruit am I dropping off in my DMZs, and what misconfigured nonsense is happening in my cloud setups, right? Come at me like you were looking
Yeah.
for something to attack.
Like you have no information on me, let's start with that. So yeah, that comes from the discussion in the beginning, understanding, right? If I just came in and gave you a menu of items, that was your expectation. I never had that conversation, we're going to have an issue at the end, right? So have that conversation, understand what you're asking for in that case. You can time box it. A lot of organizations will do that. They'll time box. We can only afford a week. We can only afford 10 weeks. That's where it's helpful to know the hourly rate of the organization. On average, pen testing firms are charging about $200 to about $300 an hour. Companies like Mandiant, more expensive ones, go all the way to $400, $500, $600. So it would depend on those conversations you have beforehand. Have those conversations first. Anything else? Yeah.
So back to how you keep us in the loop. So you mentioned like project manager.
Mm-hmm.
So is that someone that's just beyond like pen test ops, or?
Oh, it's the adult in the room who's not hands on keyboard. They're the ones actively communicating with you on behalf of the testers. I still encourage my testers to be adults and have those conversations and talk to the clients. But there's somebody who is outside of the pen testing team whose job it is to make sure the objectives are being met, the timeline is being met, that we even have the conversation of the timeline. When do we want the pen test to be done by? Do we want to stop testing at 5 p.m. because everybody in the client environment is going home at that point? Right? That's somebody who is going to make sure the report gets delivered on time. If it was up to me, the pen tester, I would never write the report. It's the boring part. Pen testing is the fun part, and nobody wants to stop testing. Every day I have to have those conversations with my 30, 40-year-old testers. Stop testing and write the report now, because you have the test starting on Monday, another one. And I don't want you to be writing the report while you're testing the other client. So that's what the project manager is going to help with. Yeah. Last question before we, and I'll be outside too if anybody wants to have more conversations. Yeah.
As an aspiring pen tester, what do you look for in someone hiring as far as the credentials?
Can they have a conversation? Are they attending conferences? Do they have any IT experience, any developer experience? That is very important. You could go and get a certification. We just hired somebody who is a yoga instructor and turned to pen testing last year and spent a year just doing that, just learning. Another one of my colleagues, he was a PI and he does stand-up comedy. So when we hired him as a pen tester, we put him on physical pen tests and social engineering. He's the person who's going to call and try to convince somebody to hand over the password. So your past experiences are going to matter. If you've had help desk experience, you know how you can call somebody and convince them to reset your password. Just happened with MGM. Okay? If you have been a developer, you make a really good application tester. So as you are wanting to be a pen tester, as you're wanting to learn more about that, try to learn the technologies and the people you will be pen testing. Okay? And drop me a note. I do a lot of work with aspiring pen testers. I was one myself a while back. I think I still am. And we'd love to continue the conversation. All right? Well, thank you, everyone. I will be right outside after this, too, and we can have more conversation. Thanks.